By late July 1944, American troops in Normandy faced German defenses that seemed utterly unbreakable. Every hedgerow, every sunken lane was a trap set by Panzer. Operation Cobra would change everything. When the skies unleashed thousands of tons of bombs, the line shattered for the first time, opening a path no one thought possible. But how did the Germans lose their iron grip so suddenly? And what hidden cost did the breakthrough demand? This is the turning point nobody saw coming. A Normandy hedgerow is nothing like a garden fence. Picture an earthen wall, 2 or even 3 meters high, packed with roots and centuries of tangled brush. At its base, a sunken lane runs dark and narrow, the banks rising above a soldier's helmet. The undergrowth is so dense that sunlight barely reaches the ground, and every step forward means crawling over slick mud, snagging on brambles, and listening for the metallic click of a tripwire. Roots twist together beneath the surface, turning every attempt at digging or blasting a hole into a slow, noisy struggle. Infantrymen learned quickly that bullets and shrapnel vanished into the green, but so did men. Moving through this terrain, a rifle squad could spend an hour just crossing a single field. The banks themselves are thick enough to stop a tank shell. Roots form a living armor, and German machine gunners, hidden behind the curtain of leaves, wait for the first movement in the open. Each field is a fortress, bordered by walls that break up lines of sight and muffle commands. Even when a patrol manages to slip through one hedgerow, the next lies just 30 meters ahead. Another barrier, another unknown. The fields themselves are uneven, pitted by old shell holes and laced with barbed wire. For the Americans, every advance comes at a price. Men crawl on their bellies, pressed flat against the earth, trying to find a gap or a weak spot in the bank. Sometimes, a single rifleman is sent ahead, inching forward with a bayonet to probe for mines. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and cordite. Sweat stings the eyes, and nerves fray with every rustle in the brush. The sound of a distant tank engine or the sudden crack of a sniper's rifle means another dash for cover, another scramble into the tangled roots. Reports from the front describe the cost in hours and lives. One day's advance might mean just a few hundred yards. A private in the 4th Infantry wrote, "Each field took hours. The banks were always mined, and every hedge could mean death." The Germans, especially Panzer, turned these natural walls into kill zones, wiring the banks for explosives, camouflaging anti-tank guns, and digging firing slits at ground level. Even tanks struggled, tracks slipping on wet grass, holes scraping against the banks, vision blocked by the green curtain. From above, the bulkage looks like a patchwork quilt. On the ground, it's a maze of blind corners and sudden violence. For the men fighting here, progress was measured not in miles, but in fields taken, one brutal yard at a time. By mid-July 1944, the Americans had finally clawed their way into St. Lo, a shattered crossroads town at the center of the Norman Maze. The fight cost more than 5,000 casualties, but with St. Lo in their hands, American planners saw a narrow ribbon of land, just 7,000 yards wide, stretching south toward Coutances. This would be the launch lane for something entirely new. Instead of spreading their strength across a broad front, the High Command drew a spike, one concentrated assault zone, designed to punch through the German line at its most brittle point. The blueprint called for a single, overwhelming blow. 7th Corps, under J. Lawton Collins, would mass its 4th and 9th Infantry divisions at the tip, with 2nd and 3rd Armored waiting behind them, engines idling, ready to surge the moment a gap appeared. The plan depended on surprise and speed, but above all, on the ability to shatter the German defenses in a single morning. Allied intelligence, sifting through intercepted German signals, confirmed what the ground commanders suspected. Panzer, battered and stretched thin, was holding this sector with fewer than half its original tanks, and its infantry was worn down by weeks of attrition. Still, the Germans had turned every field into a strong point. and their anti-tank guns waited behind every hedgerow. To break the deadlock, the plan relied on air power as a battering ram. The morning of the assault, heavy bombers would pour thousands of tons of explosives into the corridor, aiming to stun, dislocate, and blind the defenders. The timing was set for early light, when visibility favored the pilots but left the Germans exposed. The exact moment, H-hour, would be synchronized to the minute, with ground troops poised just north of the bomb line, ready to race forward the instant the last bombs fell. Any delay, any confusion, could turn the plan into disaster. Planners debated the risks in late-night briefings, weighing weather forecasts and the dangers of friendly fire. Orders were drafted, maps marked, and the 7th Corps order of battle finalized. Infantry up front, armor in reserve, artillery and engineers standing by to widen any breach. The corridor itself was little more than a scar across ruined fields, barely wide enough for the massed columns gathering in the dark. Engineers patched roads and cleared mines under constant threat of German artillery. The men waiting in assembly areas knew the cost of failure. Another week of grinding, yard by yard fighting, or worse, a counterattack that would slam shut the fragile opening. Yet for the first time since the landings, the Americans had a plan that promised not just another field, but a way out of the bocage entirely. The gamble was set. All that remained was for the sky to open and the signal to advance. Clouds hung low over Normandy on July 24th, casting a haze that blurred the bomb line and left pilots guessing at the ground below. Just after midday, the 8th Air Force launched the first wave. Hundreds of B-17 and B-24 bombers droned south, loaded with high explosives meant to shatter the German defenses in front of the 7th Corps. But as the bombers closed on target, the weather turned. Pilots struggled to spot colored marker panels through drifting smoke and shifting wind. Some formations released their bombs early, others too late. The carpet of explosions, instead of landing squarely on German positions, straddled the American assembly areas. In an instant, the ground behind the front erupted. Craters, shattered trucks, and wounded men. Reports from the 4th and 9th Infantry Divisions described chaos and confusion. At least 25 Americans were killed, more than 130 wounded, before the operation was called off. The mission was aborted, but the damage had been done. Commanders in the field radioed urgent warnings. The risk of friendly fire was real and deadly. The air-ground coordination that planners had counted on was unraveling in the haze and confusion. For the men waiting to advance, the sky had become as dangerous as the enemy ahead. The next morning, with nerves frayed and doubts growing, orders came to try again. The bombers would return, and every man on the line knew what was at stake. Bombers filled the sky again at dawn on July 25th, engines droning over the fields south of St. Lo. This time, the scale was even greater. More than 1,500 heavy bombers. Their bays loaded with high explosives, swept in on a perpendicular approach to the front. Colored panels and smoke markers, meant to signal the bomb line, blurred in the haze and drifting wind. In the confusion, entire clusters of bombs fell short by hundreds of yards. The ground shook as American assembly areas, already tense from the previous day's tragedy, erupted under friendly fire. Men scrambled for cover in ditches and shell holes, some firing rifles skyward in panic and anger. Reports from the 4th, 9th, and 30th Infantry Divisions tallied at least 111 killed and nearly 500 wounded in minutes. Among the dead was Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, present as an observer, a loss that stunned the high command. The air was thick with disbelief. Commanders on the ground and in the air traded accusations, each side blaming the other for the misaligned approach and faulty signals. After-action boards pored over planning records and mission logs, tracing the disaster to a doctrine that favored perpendicular bombing runs, despite the risks. Within days, Orders from Eisenhower's headquarters banned the use of heavy bombers so close to friendly lines under similar conditions. The cost was seared into memory, but the German defense had been battered and dislocated. With the smoke still hanging over the corridor, 7th Corps prepared to send in the armor. The breach, though uneven and paid for in blood, was finally open. The ground shook from the last echoes of the bombing as American tanks moved forward, their steel hulls bristling with something new, welded prongs jutting from the fronts like makeshift horns. These were the first Rhino hedgerow cutters, the brainchild of Staff Sergeant Curtis Cullen and his crew. Just days earlier, Cullen had watched yet another Sherman grind to a halt, its tracks spinning helplessly against a bank of earth and roots. Frustration turned to inspiration. Using scrap steel scavenged from German roadblocks, he and a team of mechanics fashioned a set of angled blades. The result was crude but effective, a tank that could punch through the bocage instead of climbing over and exposing itself to hidden guns. Word of Cullen's invention spread fast. Within a week, engineers across the 7th Corps were fitting cutters to dozens of Sherman tanks. The transformation was immediate. Instead of stalling at every hedgerow, armored columns could drive straight through, battering gaps wide enough for infantry and vehicles to follow. For the first time, the Americans moved with momentum. The tanks no longer had to back up and search for a gate or a weak spot. They made their own paths, shattering the natural defenses that had slowed them for weeks. Crews described the feeling as liberating. One gunner recalled, "We hit the hedge, the whole tank rocked, and then, suddenly, we were through." The Germans didn't have time to react. Reports from the field showed that attacks gained speed, and the element of surprise returned to the American side. The Rhino cutters didn't just open fields. They opened routes to towns like Coutances and the road to Avranches. In engineering reports, officers noted that what began as a single improvisation had become standard equipment almost overnight. The bocage, once a fortress, was now a series of doors waiting to be kicked open. Patton's arrival on August 1st changed the tempo of the campaign. The Third Army surged across the Pontobo Bridge, a single span over the Saloon River that became the artery of the breakout. Military police worked in shifts, waving columns of Shermans, half-tracks, and supply trucks through in tight formation. Unit logs recorded more than 10,000 vehicles crossing in the first 48 hours. The road surface pounded into dust by the ceaseless flow. Engineers patched the bridge at night, keeping the line open even as German artillery searched for targets along the bottleneck. As Patton's spearheads fanned west into Brittany and east toward Le Mans, German command scrambled for a response. Hitler ordered a counterattack. Operation Luttich launched in the early hours of August 7th, with panzer divisions driving hard for Mortain. Their aim, to cut the American corridor at its narrowest point and seal off the breakout. The 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory, held the high ground on Hill 314 above Mortain. For 5 days, about 700 men endured encirclement, constant shell fire, and assaults by tanks and infantry. Water and rations ran out. Wounded men lay in foxholes, waiting for darkness to crawl to aid stations. Still, the defenders held, using radios to direct artillery and call in airstrikes. Allied fighter bombers swept overhead in waves. IX Tactical Air Command and RAF Typhoons flew more than 1,200 sorties over the Mortain sector, hammering German armor caught in the open. Road columns burned, fuel convoys exploded, and panzers were forced to move by night or not at all. The German attack lost momentum, then stalled completely. By August 12th, relief columns broke through to Hill 314. The corridor to Avranches remained open, and the last German bid to sever the American advance had failed. By mid-August, the German 7th Army was trapped between converging Allied forces. Canadian units pushed south from Falaise, while American columns advanced north from Argenton. The Polish 1st Armored Division drove hard for Mont Ormel Ridge. a low rise that overlooked the last roads out of the pocket. On August 19th, Polish and Canadian troops entered Chambois, linking up with elements of the U.S. 90th Infantry Division and 2nd Armored Division. That handshake closed the jaws of the trap. Inside, the German command tried to organize a breakout, sending desperate radio messages and throwing battered columns against Allied lines. For 2 days, the fields east of Chambois erupted in chaos. Columns of trucks and tanks jammed the roads, artillery pounded the escape routes, and Allied fighter bombers worked from dawn to dusk. The Poles, dug in on Montormel, held off repeated attacks, reporting that the ground around them was littered with burning vehicles and wounded men. By August 21st, the encirclement was complete. The last organized German resistance in Normandy collapsed. Reports from the field counted as many as 40,000 prisoners taken, with thousands more dead or wounded among the tangled wreckage. Abandoned tanks and guns lined the lanes, and smoke drifted over what had been the main escape corridor. Some German groups slipped out at night, but most left behind their heavy equipment and any hope of regrouping. The Falaise pocket was sealed. The German 7th Army no longer existed as a fighting force. For the Allies, the road to the Seine and Paris now lay wide open. The battle for Normandy ended not with a single blow, but with a multinational grip that squeezed the last strength from the defenders. The consequences would echo across France in the weeks that followed. In just 4 weeks after the launch of Operation Cobra on July 25, 1944, Allied forces transformed a static front into a sweeping breakout across France. Documents confirm that over 1,500 U.S. bombers opened the assault, and by August 21st, the Falaise pocket was closed, trapping much of Germany's 7th Army. Despite careful planning, friendly fire from short-falling bombs claimed hundreds of American casualties, including Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair. The rapid adoption of the Rhino tank cutter, developed in the field, allowed American armor to breach the bocage and overwhelm German lines. While official records detail the sequence of attacks and the scale of German losses, the full number of civilian and military casualties in the chaos of the breakout remains uncertain. Historians agree that Operation Cobra's success marked a decisive shift, with the initiative passing irreversibly to the Allies. Today, the fields of Normandy still bear traces of the battle that broke the German line and opened the road to Paris, providing enduring evidence of how adaptation and concentrated force changed the course of the war.